This is a Pasco Media production. Please visit pascomedia.com.
In Latin, Renovo means to renew, restore, or revive. This is the show where we explore the miraculous nature of the mundane as we look at one part of the Catholic tradition to help you engage more fully in the practice of faith. Past episodes are available at renovopodcast.com. I'm Doug Tuke, and I am jacked about today because I work in the film industry now as the director of marketing for ODB Films, an amazing nonprofit Catholic film company out of St. Charles, Illinois, with the great Eric Groth, executive producer, TJ Bearden, producer, and Katie Reedy, our director of operations. We're just a little four-person company consecrated to Mary in the Diocese of Rockford. It has been an amazing transition for me, and I love everything about it. So I got excited. I was like, hey, let's do a podcast on Jesus in film, because everyone loves Christian movies. Not so much. So the faith audience, God bless it. There is an amazing multi-million-dollar industry around Christian films. And I think that a lot of, especially Catholics, we kind of go, nah. We say, okay, Mel Gibson's Passion and then everything else. That's a bummer because there's actually really good stuff out there, but there's a lot of crap. I mean, like a lot of crap. In fact, Jim Caviezel was recently interviewed. He was talking about his role as Luke in Paul, the Apostle of Christ, an ODB film. We're pretty excited about that. And he was getting interviewed by Raymond Arroyo, and he just kind of smirked when he was asked about Christian films. And he goes, sometimes there's just too much. And then he goes, sugar. And Raymond Arroyo thought he was going to say something else. And then everybody kind of laughed and he goes, too much sugar in my coffee. I can't have that much sweetness, and he's naming kind of sometimes the aversion to the rawness of the Christian narrative in film. And that is kind of what our show's going to be about. We're not going to talk just about Christian film, though. We're going to talk about the actual role of Christ specifically in film. So films about Jesus, not God is not dead, heaven is for real, courageous, fireproof, God bless them all, but like the actual depictions of Christ. And I'm kind of excited about it because I think it's a hot topic. I think that we kind of ignore the greatness of it. So everyone knows, okay, what kind of damage gets done to the soul when you watch bad film, okay? And there's actually, I mean, there's, sometimes bad film draws us into sin. Certainly pornography does. Okay, so they seduce, a bad film can really seduce a young person, and they can glorify evil. I mean, that's just the reality. Okay, sometimes films they show life under kind of a falseness, a false light. They cloud like great values and judgment. They destroy the notions of what pure love really is. They kind of destroy our image of marriage sometimes, or the quality of family. Movies are amazing. I mean, we, especially in America, we love to talk about movies. That quote, that statement, didn't come from Pope Francis. So everyone knows what damage is done to the soul by bad motion pictures. That line, it wasn't Francis, it wasn't Pope Benedict, it wasn't John Paul II. That quote was actually written by Pope Pius XI in 1936. Okay, isn't that amazing that for a long time, like cinema has been this like profoundly influential vehicle in culture, and in the midst of that, the notion of quote unquote faith audience has developed. It's a money making endeavor. Hollywood defines it, and the definition of faith audience kind of boils down to churchgoers. Most of the time, our evangelical Protestant brothers and sisters. And it's like those folks well off enough to avoid a night at the movies. They're interested in inspirational biblical adaptations, films about heaven, family, good neighbors. They're kind of highly critical. The films are highly critical of sexuality or bad language. But if you're not devout, you probably miss that whole genre of films altogether. Like you're not contributing to the box office, but these films are big business in the modern era. It's amazing. In the last 3 years, the last 4 years, low budget Christian themed films have earned over $445 million at the US box office. Now you think of Black Panther, which has already made over $1 billion. That's not a lot of money. If a $2 million movie makes $60 million, that's a lot of money for a small investment. Okay. And these films are, they're basically kind of well-intentioned, kind of kitschy, kind of innocuous. They're just, they're just kind of, they're soulless, but they put up a straw man, evil person, and then the Christians are victorious. That is popular, okay? And that's tough because sometimes those types of films can actually be more anti-Christian, especially those who really read the Gospels and realize the bloodiness of the Gospels and the welcomed immigrant of the Gospels and the notions of defending the faith actually in the Gospels, that those things that kind of get lost. Now everybody knows. Now, after the Passion of the Christ, 2004 made more money than anyone ever dreamed possible. Okay, it's still the highest grossing R-rated film of all time in America, period. $2 billion bucks, like $1 billion in the US and $1 billion in Australia. Okay. So a lot of studios kind of frantically tried to kind of corner the faith market, and they produce movies that entices churches to go out and buy tickets, to buy out theaters. And we've done that with Paul, Apostle of Christ. In our collaboration with Sony Affirm, we've talked about that because we think it's an unapologetically Catholic film and it's really great. We want you to go see it. But there's a long history of kind of sword and sandal flicks that go way before the Passion of Christ. Okay. And as we approach Holy Week, I thought it'd be kind of fun to just kind of survey, this kind of checkered history of biblical epic, especially the often told story of the life of Christ specifically. So here it is, friends. Forget James Bond, okay, or Spider-Man. The Son of Man, Jesus Christ, has been the focus of way more cinematic adaptations and remakes with a lot of mixed results, okay? Way more. I mean, there's been so many. All the way back from Path's depiction of the life of the Passion of Jesus Christ in 1902, okay, to Mel Gibson's The Passion of Christ in 2004, you have to understand, filmmakers have tried to encapsulate Christ, the life of Christ, and really inspire Christians while also raising concerns about anti-Semitism and other themes, okay? Too many depictions of the Last Supper have completely failed, okay? But the goal being to remind viewers that Jesus was first and foremost a Jewish man observing Passover. It has not gone well in history. Sometimes artistic choices and like interpretations actually often they reflect the spirit of the age when the film is actually made. And maybe even by looking kind of across cinematic history, we can actually kind of like transcend, okay, some of our own kind of cultural blinders and maybe even kind of come to a deep understanding of what Jesus meant and means. That's what the goal of good Christian film, especially a depiction of Christ, can and ought to be. Okay, so let's go back in time. So the grandest silent Jesus film, Cecil B. DeMille's King of Kings, 1927, okay? H.B. Warner portrays Jesus with kind of this awesome strength and confidence, but DeMille kind of takes a lot of liberties with the biblical narrative, okay? I mean, he kind of does his own thing. He creates a love triangle between Mary, Judas, and Jesus. He blends kind of sex and spirituality as kind of this scantily clad Mary Magdalene dances across the screen. There's kind of eerie special effects. The King of Kings, it hasn't really held up over time. It's kind of weird. 7 deadly sins exit Mary's body. There's just pieces that are just they're kind of out there. It's worth seeing, but it's a historical film. We'll just put it that. Jesus becomes almost this kind of otherworldly figure in the 50s. He's depicted with like reverence that kind of only the back of his head could be revealed in the robe, 1953. Ben-Hur, 1959. Almost this kind of like this kind of like separate character. It wasn't an intimate character. It was always this kind of abstract character. These were epics though, and these films, The Robe and Ben-Hur, had massive box office. Like they heavily surpassed other films. King of Kings in 1961, and then The Greatest Story Ever Told in 1966, were also huge box office smashes, but were kind of similar, kind of an abstract Jesus. And the sincerity in these movies can be kind of stifled or stifling. As you know, they would have Hollywood stars kind of make these distracting cameos. John Wayne appears as the Roman soldier stationed at the foot of the cross with Christ. It almost kind of killed The Greatest Story Ever Told. It really kind of did. It was like a huge distraction. Okay, so In the 60s, theology kind of wrestles with this idea of God is dead, that movement. And filmmakers kind of began their quest for this sort of more of a historical Jesus, okay? Pier Paolo Pasolini's The Gospel According to St. Matthew, 1966, it's widely regarded as basically the most authentic and moving life of Christ on film. I've seen it, and I took a class in college, a history of film and fiction, and it is unbelievable. The dialogue is the scripture, and they make it work. It's this gorgeous kind of black and white with some social agenda going on there. That's truly moving. They casted non-professional actors from the kind of a remote Italian village. Pasolini, it's gritty. Like he brings this kind of gritty gospel with really kind of no extravagant features. In the film, Christ is like this man of the people, serving the poor, challenging the authorities. Pasolini was a homosexual gay man with Marxist leanings. He was very open about this. And he highlights Jesus' solidarity with those outside the corridors of power. I mean, he's like Jesus for the margins. It was a very political statement on his part. But like, it's hard because you got to ask yourself, like, how do you kind of beyond church borders create a really compelling portrait of Christ? And it's a very artistic film, which kind of distanced itself from the public. The public didn't really grab a hold of it. Now it gets studied in film schools, but it's very different. It's really kind of its own thing. All right, so all these kinds of cultural shifts coming out of the 60s, they really resulted in like a vibrant reimagination of the life of Christ, okay? So from Broadway musicals, right, came Jesus Christ Superstar, 1973, Godspell, also 1973. They both use like rock music to place Christ's loyalties with like hippies and flower children, right? The marginalized. Now, Jesus Christ Superstar actually retained kind of a Middle Eastern setting. Godspell brings the Bible to New York City, right? The clown Jesus, right? He's a holy fool. He kind of sporting a Superman logo and suspenders, right? It's like a groovy time capsule, okay? But the goal was to make Christianity relevant in really a turbulent time. So the idea of really socializing Christ into modern culture had a lot of appeal. My parents still rocked out to Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar on vinyl in my house. I was raised listening to it. I remember it. And that's tough. It's tough. Then came the later 70s, and there's like this demythologizing, I guess for lack of a better term, of the Bible. And it happens in real academic circles, and it kind of led to like cinematic controversy. Like movies started to ask like curtailing questions, like these hard questions. So Christians, they protested literally the release of like Monty Python's Life of Brian, 1979, Martin Scorsese's The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988. We'll talk more about that later. These hard-edged, very human Jesus films. Both of them generated way more headlines than ticket sales. Those films did not do well in the theater. I mean, Life of Brian's my favorite Monty Python comedy. It demonstrates how cults are born out of disinformation, and that was really the poke that they were making. But at the same time, I can see where it was offensive. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the film, it respects Jesus, but it mocks how crowds, they kind of clamor for miracles and they form a faction around like really thin premises. So a lot of Christians didn't find the humor. They you watch the crucifixion and then sing "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life." That's not gonna win hearts. But the charges of blasphemy, they reached a whole nother level with The Last Temptation of Christ. So the director, Martin Scorsese, who recently directed Silence, and it was received with a lot of criticism as well, he described the film as an act of devotion. But a lot of outspoken Christian leaders denounced it as absolute abomination. So audiences basically failed to distinguish between the gospel accounts of Jesus and then actually the film's source material, which was a unbelievable novel. It is an unbelievable novel, and you should read it, by Nikos Kazantzakis. I always say that wrong. So Scorsese basically depicts Jesus' temptation to leave the cross for a life of domestic bliss. It's a dream. And then the courageous faith affirmed at the conclusion of the film was totally lost amidst this like sort of like double-minded portrait of Christ that sort of came before it. So it's really unfortunate because the film, I actually like the film. The film says, what if Christ didn't die on the cross? And it kind of answers that question, but it depicts Christ having sex. It depicts a very human Christ, living humanity, denouncing Paul, all these things, and people just couldn't handle it. That's a bummer because the book is amazing. The book like describes the Holy Spirit kind of clawing into Christ and the challenge of being who he was made to be. I thought it was amazing. I don't think it's a really great film. It's a low-budget film. I mean, you got Harvey Keitel playing Judas, but Willem Dafoe is amazing. And when I was in college and I studied that film, I wrote some of the best papers I've ever written because of that film. It just inspired these hard questions. But take it or leave it. It never did well in the box office and still controversial with the church. Jesus of Montreal, 1989. This is kind of a brilliant commentary on the domesticated Jesus. It basically places the passion narrative within like a Canadian theater troupe. There's a dwindling church. It's kind of eager to attract a crowd at Easter, and it commissions this kind of desperate actor to update the passion play. And then the church authorities in Montreal are way too busy putting on a show to notice the actual shocking parallels to the crucifixion kind of happening in their midst. It's worth a see. I mean, it's worth a see. I don't think it's great. The idea was kind of creative, but it's worth checking out. And then there's the Passion, the bloody Jesus in Mel Gibson's Passion of Christ, 2004. And this thing generated a lot of press. And I mean, he spent his own money. He went around and screened this thing for everybody. He wanted everyone to see it. Gibson had to kind of respond to charges of anti-Semitism, and he did so with a lot of defiance. There was very kind of an anti-Pharisaical Judaism in the film, and it created a huge anticipation for the movie. It was a script in Aramaic. It didn't court mass audience yet. It was a little movie. It was shot in the same village as the Gospel according to St. Matthew, which had become an international, the same one we talked about, the black and white. Love it or hate it, everybody went to see it. I mean, like this thing, it's the bookend of Christian films. And he made the crucifixion front page news. I mean, you can't deny that. That's a really big deal. Kind of only in years to come after the Passion, after 2004, it's hard for us to even judge what this film is. We'll finish the show with some stories about that, but I mean, unbelievable. So new filmmakers have charted out to do this, and very few have dared to kind of combine Christ and cinema since then. I mean, there's a couple. 2 films released in 2006 cast Jesus as a black man, The Colors of the Cross, which is one, connected Jesus' persecution of the struggles of the people of color, and Son of Man places Jesus in kind of contemporary South African context. Mark Burnett and Roma Downey, they should be commended for kind of daring to bring Christ back to the big screen, especially under kind of the bold title Son of God. But almost every attempt to adapt the life of Christ to the big screen has kind of faced a lot of resistance. And we can be pretty confident that this kind of like, Christ's radical sacrificial life, it will continue to inspire storytellers, but at what end? You know what I mean? Here's the thing. And having just dabbled in the Christian movie industry over the last kind of 6 months really seriously, and over the last year as more of a part-time person, here's what I've learned. You have an audience, because it's Jesus Christ, that will flock to film. And that makes perfect sense. And you have the Passion, this rated R bloody telling of Christ. And don't get me wrong, when that film came out, I was in full-time youth ministry. I went with young people. We had conversations at levels of depth that we had never had before in youth ministry. So I'm not poo-pooing the Passion in any way, shape, or form. I don't want to see it again. I don't want to watch that movie again. I think that the blood, I think that those images are in my mind. I know what they are. I get excited about great period piece Christian films that can promulgate this narrative of the necessary redeeming nature of Christ, not the shock value, but that we need that redemption. We need redemption. I thought that's what Last Temptation of Christ did. I think that's what Mel Gibson's Passion did, and that gets me excited about Christian film. I don't get excited about Christian film that's really just kind of that sort of straw man villain, and there's just kind of this lighthearted, here's what you say, here's how you defend the faith kind of crap. Faith is a struggle. It's tough. It's not sweet. It's not easy. It's not one moment. It's not one prayer. It's a life of devotion. That gets me excited about film. Okay. That gets me excited about our upcoming film, Paul the Apostle of Christ. That film shows mercy. You take the character Paul and say, Christ is necessary for the most evil of sinners to completely have a change of heart and become who God intended him to be. That gets me excited. So Christ in film, it's been around for a long time, 1902 on. I mean, quite frankly, as a topic of film, I can't wait to see what the future holds for these incredible opportunities to continue to tell the narrative and to put a face on the imagery and the characters that we all know from Scripture. Pretty exciting stuff. Jesus in film. What's your favorite? What's your favorite? What's the most compelling Christ film you've seen and why? Have that conversation as we get ready to kind of head into Holy Week. Don't forget to visit RenovoPodcast.com for past episodes. Please subscribe to, review, and rate our podcast. We always appreciate your input. Your topic suggestions, questions, and/or comments are always welcome at Doug@RenovoPodcast.com. Learn more about me at DougTook.com, which will take you actually to RenovoPodcast.com, or on Twitter and Instagram at DTOOKE1. Friends, always remember to engage the tradition and live the conversion. Until next time, God bless.